The tension in the Democratic leadership conference room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Kamala Harris sat at the head of the mahogany table, her signature purple blazer perfectly pressed, fingers drumming impatiently as she listened to the heated debate about the party's future direction. Then it happened. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th district, stood up with a folder of documents in her hand. At 43, Crockett had built her reputation as a meticulous attorney who never entered a courtroom unprepared. Today would be no different. Her voice was steady but firm as she challenged Harris's proposed strategy on criminal justice reform. Madam Vice President, with all due respect, your approach contradicts everything we've been fighting for in terms of progressive reform. We can't continue policies that have systematically destroyed communities while pretending we're champions of justice. The room shifted uncomfortably. Several Democratic leaders exchanged glances. They had expected policy disagreements, but Crockett's tone suggested something deeper was coming. Harris's eyes flashed with irritation. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not by someone she viewed as a political newcomer. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension that would soon become her biggest mistake. "Listen, Junior," Harris said, emphasizing the word like a slap. "I was prosecuting cases and making real change when you were still in law school. Maybe you should focus on learning how things actually work before questioning those of us with real experience." The room fell silent. Every phone in the room started recording. What happened next would destroy Harris's credibility in ways she never saw coming. But what made this moment so explosive wasn't just the confrontation itself. It was the timing. This meeting was supposed to be a strategy session for the upcoming midterm elections. Democratic leaders had gathered to discuss messaging on crime, immigration, and economic policy. Harris had come in confident, expecting to lead the discussion based on her experience. Instead, she walked into what would become a political ambush that would redefine her career. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The woman who had built her reputation on courtroom confrontations was about to be dismantled by someone who had spent years defending the victims of her prosecutorial zeal. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss these political bombshells that the mainstream media won't show you. To understand why this moment was so devastating for Kamala Harris, you need to know exactly who these two women are and what they represent in today's Democratic Party. Kamala Harris entered this meeting thinking she held all the cards. As Vice President and former California Attorney General, she'd built her career on being the tough prosecutor who knew how to handle crime. Her resume was impressive on paper. District Attorney of San Francisco, California Attorney General, U.S. Senator, and now Vice President. She'd prosecuted thousands of cases, sent people to prison, and climbed every rung of the political ladder. But there was a problem with Harris's record that was about to explode in her face. During her time as San Francisco's district attorney from 2004 to 2011, Harris had built what she called a smart on-crime approach. But critics argued it was the same old tough on-crime policies dressed up in progressive language. She had campaigned on reform but governed like a traditional prosecutor more concerned with conviction rates than justice. Her office had prosecuted over 1,900 marijuana cases while she privately admitted to using the drug herself. She had fought against DNA testing that could have freed innocent people. She had defended a laboratory technician who had been stealing drugs and tampering with evidence for years. When these scandals broke, Harris's office continued using the tainted evidence to secure convictions. Most damaging of all, internal memos from her office would later reveal a culture that prioritized political advancement over justice. Prosecutors were encouraged to seek maximum sentences, even in cases where rehabilitation might have been more appropriate. Defense attorneys regularly complained that Harris's office was unusually aggressive, even by prosecutor standards. On the other side of the table sat Jasmine Crockett, a 43-year-old civil rights attorney from Dallas who'd only been in Congress since 2023. To Harris, Crockett was just another freshman representative who needed to learn her place. What Harris didn't realize was that Crockett had spent her entire legal career cleaning up the messes that prosecutors like Harris had created. Crockett had represented hundreds of clients who'd been wrongfully convicted. She'd overturned death sentences, She'd exposed prosecutorial misconduct. She'd seen firsthand how tough-on-crime policies had destroyed communities, especially black communities. And she'd done her homework on Kamala Harris. But Crockett's preparation for this moment went deeper than anyone realized. 4 months, she had been working with a team of law students and criminal justice advocates to compile a comprehensive database of Harris's cases. They had obtained court records, interviewed victims' families, and tracked down prosecutors who had worked under Harris and were willing to speak anonymously about the culture in her office. One former prosecutor, who spoke on condition of anonymity, had told Crockett, "Kamala always talked about reform in public, but in private, the message was clear. Conviction rates mattered more than anything else. If you didn't get convictions, you didn't advance." Another source, a public defender who had faced Harris's office regularly, said, "They were more aggressive than most DA offices I've dealt with. Even in cases where the evidence was questionable, they would push forward. It was like they were more concerned with their political image than with justice." The stakes of this confrontation went far beyond personal pride. The Democratic Party was at a crossroads. The old guard, represented by Harris, believed in working within the system, even if that system was broken. The new generation, led by people like Crockett, demanded fundamental change. This wasn't just about two women disagreeing. This was about the soul of the Democratic Party and whether it would continue to embrace policies that had failed communities of color for decades. Harris thought her experience gave her authority. She was about to learn that experience could also be a liability when that experience included a record of harm. After Harris's junior comment, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she opened her folder and pulled out the first document. "Since you want to talk about experience, Madam Vice President, let's discuss your record," Crockett said, her voice calm but steely. "Between 2004 and 2010, as San Francisco's DA, you prosecuted over 1,900 marijuana cases. You sent people to prison for the same drug you now joke about using yourself." Harris's smile faltered. "Those were different times." "Different times?" Crockett interrupted, pulling out another document. "Were they different when you fought against DNA testing that could have freed innocent people on death row? When you argued in court that prisoners couldn't be released even when evidence proved their innocence because it might impact the state's labor programs?" The room was getting uncomfortable. Other Democratic leaders were shifting in their seats, some pulling out their phones to fact-check what they were hearing. Harris tried to regain control. "Look, as a prosecutor, you make tough decisions based on the law as it exists." "The law as it exists." Crockett's voice rose slightly. "You had discretion. You chose to prosecute parents whose kids missed school while fighting to keep nonviolent offenders locked up. You built your career on the backs of the same communities you now claim to represent." Crockett pulled out a newspaper clipping. "Let me read this headline from the San Francisco Chronicle, dated March 15, 2009. Harris's office seeks maximum sentence for single mother who missed work to care for sick child. That mother, Maria Santos, got 180 days in jail because her daughter had chronic asthma and missed too much school. Where was your prosecutorial discretion then?" The room was getting colder. Even Harris's usual allies were looking uncomfortable. Senator Chuck Schumer, who had been scrolling through his phone, put it down and started paying attention. "Or how about this one?" Crockett continued, pulling out another document. "James Rodriguez, a 19-year-old first-time offender caught with less than an ounce of marijuana. Your office pushed for 6 months in county jail. 6 months that cost taxpayers $15,000 and destroyed a young man's college prospects. All for a drug you now joke about using yourself." Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was in the meeting, later described the atmosphere as electric with tension. Harris's allies were starting to look concerned. They'd seen her handle tough questions before, but this was different. Crockett wasn't attacking with political talking points. She was attacking with facts, names, and human faces. Harris made her second major mistake of the day. Instead of acknowledging the criticism and moving forward, she doubled down. "I find it interesting," Harris said, her voice taking on that prosecutorial tone she was famous for, "that someone with such limited experience in actual governance thinks she can lecture me about criminal justice. When you've actually had to make the hard decisions, when you've actually been responsible for public safety, then maybe we can have this conversation. That's when Crockett smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. You want to talk about hard decisions? Crockett asked, pulling out a thick stack of papers. Let's talk about Jamal Truelove. Harris's face went pale. She knew exactly who Jamal Truelove was. For those who don't know, Crockett continued, looking around the room, Jamal Truelove was an aspiring actor who was wrongfully convicted of murder in San Francisco. The real killer was still on the streets while an innocent black man sat in prison. When new evidence emerged that could have freed him, Kamala Harris's office fought against it. The room was dead silent now. Everyone was listening. You could hear a pin drop as Crockett continued building her case. Jamal Truelove was just 22 years old when your office put him behind bars for a murder he didn't commit, Crockett said, her voice steady but filled with righteous anger. He lost 6 years of his life. 6 years he'll never get back. 6 years while the real killer walked free. And when his lawyers brought forward new evidence that should have freed him immediately, your office fought it every step of the way. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the knockout punch. It took years of fighting, but Jamal was eventually exonerated and awarded $13.1 million by the city for his wrongful conviction. But here's what really matters, Madam Vice President. That $13.1 million came from taxpayers. The people of San Francisco had to pay for your office's mistakes while you climbed the political ladder. Where was your commitment to justice then? Senator Bernie Sanders, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with a grim expression. This wasn't just political theater. These were real people's lives being discussed. Harris opened her mouth to respond, but Crockett wasn't finished. And that's just one case. Should we talk about Kevin Cooper, George Powell, Daniel Larson? All cases where your office either fought against evidence of innocence or failed to properly investigate misconduct by your prosecutors. Crockett pulled out another document. Kevin Cooper sits on death row to this day, despite DNA evidence that could prove his innocence. Your office opposed testing that evidence. George Powell spent years in prison after your prosecutors hid evidence that would have cleared him. Daniel Larson was denied parole repeatedly because your office argued he was incorrigible, even though he was factually innocent. The weight of these names hung heavy in the air. These weren't statistics or talking points. These were human beings whose lives had been destroyed by the very system Harris claimed to represent with pride. Representative Pramila Jayapal shifted uncomfortably in her seat. As someone who had worked on criminal justice reform, she knew these cases well. Seeing them laid out like this, one after another, was devastating. Each of these men had families, Crockett continued, her voice growing more passionate. Mothers who cried themselves to sleep. Children who grew up without their fathers. Wives who struggled to make ends meet while fighting a system that was supposed to protect them but instead became their enemy. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was also in the meeting, later tweeted that the tension in the room was unlike anything I've experienced in politics. Harris was clearly flustered now. Her usual confidence was cracking. She kept glancing at her staff members sitting along the wall, as if expecting one of them to rescue her from this nightmare. But they all looked as shocked as she did. None of them had anticipated this level of detailed opposition research. You're cherry-picking cases, Harris started, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Cherry-picking? Crockett laughed, but there was no humor in it. These aren't cherries, Madam Vice President. These are people's lives. Lives that your experience helped destroy. She gestured to her folder, which still contained dozens of documents. I could go on for hours. Do you want me to tell this room about the 47 cases where your office withheld evidence? The 23 times defense attorneys filed misconduct complaints against your prosecutors? The internal emails where your staff joked about bleeding heart defense attorneys who actually cared about their clients? The room was now completely silent except for the sound of phones buzzing as word of the confrontation began to leak out. Several Democratic leaders were taking notes, realizing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. What happened next would be replayed on social media millions of times and fundamentally change how people viewed Kamala Harris's record. Jasmine Crockett reached into her folder one more time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She held it up so everyone in the room could see it. "This," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room, "is a memo from your office in 2010. A memo that instructed your prosecutors to seek maximum sentences for non-violent drug offenses, even for first-time offenders. Even when those offenders were struggling with addiction." Harris's face was ashen now. She recognized the document, and the blood drained from her cheeks as she realized where this was heading. "While you were sending people to prison for marijuana possession," Crockett continued, "what were you doing in your personal life? Because I have video of you on The Breakfast Club laughing about smoking weed in college. You literally joked about listening to Snoop Dogg and Tupac while getting high." She paused, letting the hypocrisy sink in before delivering the next blow. "But here's what makes it even worse. You didn't just prosecute marijuana cases. You fought to keep people locked up even after it became clear that marijuana laws were destroying families. In 2010, when California was debating marijuana decriminalization, where was your voice? You were silent when you could have used your platform to advocate for the very people your office was prosecuting." The hypocrisy was staggering, and everyone in the room felt it. Senator Cory Booker, who had been one of Harris's supporters, visibly winced at the comparison. But Crockett wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and played the audio clip. Harris's own voice filled the room. "Half my family's from Jamaica. Are you kidding me?" Followed by her distinctive laugh about smoking marijuana. The contrast was devastating. Harris laughing about her own drug use while her office destroyed lives for the same behavior. "So when you call me Junior," Crockett said, putting her phone down and looking directly at Harris, "remember that this junior member of Congress has spent her career fixing the damage that your experience caused to our communities." Harris tried one last time to save face. "The criminal justice system is complex." "It's not complex," Crockett interrupted, her voice rising with passion. "It's simple. You had the power to choose justice, and you chose politics. You had the power to choose mercy, and you chose your career. You had the power to protect communities, and you chose to protect a system that was destroying them." The room erupted. Not in applause, but in shocked murmurs and the sound of phones buzzing as news of the confrontation started to leak out. Representative Ro Khanna later described the moment. "I've been in hundreds of political meetings, but I've never seen someone's entire record dismantled so thoroughly and so publicly." Harris stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I think we need to take a break," she said, but her voice was shaky. As she walked toward the door, Crockett delivered the final blow. "Madam Vice President, the next time you want to dismiss someone as junior, maybe make sure your own record can stand up to scrutiny." The door closed behind Harris with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gavel falling. The room remained silent for several long seconds, as if everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. Finally, Representative Katie Porter broke the silence. "Well, that just happened." Senator Bernie Sanders, who had been taking notes throughout the confrontation, looked up and said quietly, "That wasn't just a political disagreement. That was a reckoning." The room slowly began to buzz with whispered conversations as Democratic leaders tried to process the implications of what they had just seen. Some were clearly sympathetic to Crockett, nodding approvingly at her methodical dismantling of Harris's record. Others looked concerned about the potential damage to the party's unity. But everyone understood that they had just witnessed something unprecedented in Democratic politics. A sitting vice president being systematically destroyed by a freshman congresswoman armed with nothing but facts and moral clarity. Within minutes of the meeting ending, the story was everywhere. Someone in the room had recorded Crockett's presentation on their phone, and excerpts were already hitting Twitter. The hashtag #JuniorVSSenior started trending within an hour, but not in the way Harris's supporters had hoped. The first tweet that went viral came from a progressive activist account. Jasmine Crockett just exposed Kamala Harris's entire career in 15 minutes. When you call someone junior but your record is trash. #JuniorVSSenior. The tweet included a thread breaking down every case Crockett had mentioned, complete with court documents and news articles. Within 6 hours, it had been retweeted over 50,000 times. But the real damage came from the mainstream media coverage. Print media was particularly brutal. The Washington Post ran a front-page analysis titled "The Prosecutor's Dilemma: When Past Convictions Become Political Liabilities." The article meticulously fact-checked every claim Crockett had made and found them all to be accurate and well-documented. The New York Times editorial board, which rarely weighs in on internal Democratic disputes, published a scathing piece called "The Questions Kamala Harris Must Answer." The editorial didn't take sides but noted that the specificity and documentation of Congresswoman Crockett's presentation raises serious questions that deserve serious answers. USA Today, often seen as more centrist, ran a week-long series examining Harris's prosecutorial record. Each day focused on a different case Crockett had mentioned, complete with interviews from the families affected. The series was titled "Justice Denied: When Prosecutors Choose Politics Over People." But perhaps most damaging was the coverage in legal publications. The American Bar Association Journal ran an article questioning whether Harris's record met the ethical standards expected of prosecutors. Legal blogs and law review articles began analyzing the cases, with many concluding that Harris's office had indeed prioritized conviction rates over justice. CNN's legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, who had previously been supportive of Harris, wrote a scathing analysis. Congresswoman Crockett's presentation raises serious questions about Vice President Harris's prosecutorial record that she has never adequately addressed. MSNBC's Mehdi Hasan devoted an entire segment to the confrontation, fact-checking each of Crockett's claims. The verdict was devastating. Every single allegation was accurate and well-documented. Even the New York Times, which had endorsed Harris in the 2020 primaries, published an editorial titled "The Prosecutor's Past: Kamala Harris and the Questions That Won't Go Away." But the most damaging coverage came from an unexpected source, Trevor Noah on The Daily Show. "So Kamala Harris called Jasmine Crockett Jr.," Noah said during his monologue. And Crockett responded by pulling out receipts like she was returning a broken toaster to Target. "I haven't seen someone get destroyed this badly since the last time someone challenged Jasmine Crockett's credentials." The clip of Noah's monologue got over 3 million views on YouTube in 24 hours. Social media was brutal. Memes flooded every platform. One of the most popular showed Harris's laughing face next to a photo of an empty prison cell with the caption, "When you're smoking weed but also sending people to prison for smoking weed." Another meme showed Crockett holding up documents with the caption, "When someone calls you junior but you brought the receipts." The political implications were immediate and severe. Progressive groups that had been lukewarm on Harris before now openly questioned her leadership. Black Lives Matter Los Angeles released a statement saying, "Congresswoman Crockett's presentation reminds us why we cannot trust politicians who built their careers on the system of mass incarceration." The ACLU, which had previously worked with Harris on some issues, released their own statement. The cases mentioned by Congresswoman Crockett highlight ongoing concerns about prosecutorial misconduct and the need for criminal justice reform. But perhaps most damaging of all was the response from Harris's own staff. Within 48 hours of the confrontation, 3 sources within the vice president's office leaked to Politico that Harris was furious and felt ambushed. One aide was quoted as saying, "She keeps asking why no one prepared her for Crockett's research." The leak made Harris look even worse. Not only had she been unprepared for legitimate criticism, but she was now blaming her staff for her own failures. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett became an overnight progressive hero. Justice Democrats immediately invited her to headline their next fundraising event. The Congressional Progressive Caucus released a statement praising her thorough research and commitment to accountability. Crockett's own fundraising exploded. Her campaign reported raising over $200,000 in small-dollar donations in the 48 hours following the confrontation, with most donations accompanied by messages like "Thank you for speaking truth to power" and "Keep holding them accountable." The contrast couldn't have been starker. While Harris was dealing with negative coverage and staff leaks, Crockett was being celebrated as the future of the progressive movement. But the story didn't end there. 3 days after the initial confrontation, Harris attempted a comeback on The View. It was a disaster. When Joy Behar asked about the meeting with Crockett, Harris tried to deflect, "Look, I think it's important that we have these conversations within the party, but we can't let perfect be the enemy of good." Whoopi Goldberg wasn't having it, but Kamala, these weren't just policy disagreements. These were specific cases where innocent people went to prison. How do you respond to that? Harris's answer was painful to watch. Well, Whoopi, as a prosecutor, you're working within the system as it exists, and sometimes that system fails people. But the important thing is that we keep working to make it better. The interview went viral for all the wrong reasons. Critics pointed out that Harris had just admitted that the system fails people while defending her role in those failures. Within hours, the hashtag #SystemFails was trending, with thousands of users posting about their own experiences with prosecutorial misconduct. One tweet that particularly stung came from Jamal Truelove himself. "The system didn't fail me. Kamala Harris failed me. There's a difference." The tweet included a photo of Truelove with his young daughter, a daughter who had grown up without her father for 6 crucial years because of decisions made in Harris's office. Another viral moment came from criminal justice advocate Sean King, who posted a thread breaking down each case Crockett had mentioned. The thread was retweeted over 75,000 times and included court documents, family photos, and testimonials from the wrongfully convicted. "This isn't ancient history," King wrote. "These cases happened during Harris's tenure. She knew about them. She made choices. She chose politics over people." The final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected source, Barack Obama. During a private fundraiser in Chicago, Obama was asked about the Harris-Crockett confrontation. His response, which was recorded and later leaked, was telling. "Look, I think both women are committed to justice, but Jasmine raised some important questions that deserve answers. We can't move forward as a party without honestly confronting our past." It was a diplomatic response, but everyone understood the subtext. Obama was not defending Harris. The long-term implications of the confrontation were profound. Harris's approval ratings, which had already been struggling, dropped another 5 points in the week following the meeting. More importantly, her support among black voters, which had always been a key part of her political coalition, began to erode. The numbers were devastating. A focus group conducted by Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher found that black voters who learned about Harris's prosecutorial record were 34% less likely to support her in future elections. The focus group participants used words like betrayed, disappointed, and angry to describe their feelings. "I thought she was one of us," said one participant, a 45-year-old teacher from Atlanta. "But learning about how she treated people who looked like my son, I can't support that." Another participant, a social worker from Detroit, was even more direct. "She climbed that ladder on our backs, then kicked it down behind her. That's not leadership, that's betrayal." The focus group footage, which was leaked to The Intercept, became another viral moment. Watching real black voters grapple with the cognitive dissonance of supporting someone who had harmed their communities was powerful television. A poll conducted by The Hill found that 67% of Democratic voters wanted more information about Harris's prosecutorial record, and 43% said the new information would affect their vote in future elections. For Crockett, the confrontation launched her into the national spotlight in a way that few freshman representatives ever achieve. She was invited to speak at law schools, progressive conferences, and criminal justice reform events across the country. More importantly, her research methodology became a model for other progressive politicians challenging establishment figures. The Crockett Standard, coming to political confrontations with thorough documentation and receipts, became a new expectation in progressive politics. The Democratic Party itself was forced to grapple with uncomfortable questions about its past embrace of tough-on-crime policies. Several other prosecutors turned politicians found themselves facing new scrutiny about their records. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the broader conversation about accountability in politics. The confrontation sparked a national conversation about the role of prosecutors in the criminal justice system. Law schools across the country began incorporating the Harris-Crockett exchange into their curricula as a case study in prosecutorial ethics and accountability. Professor Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow, wrote in The Nation, "The Crockett-Harris confrontation represents a generational shift in how we think about criminal justice. We can no longer allow prosecutors to hide behind just following the law when they had discretion to choose justice over politics." The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, announced they would be launching a new initiative to track the records of prosecutor politicians, using the Crockett model of thorough documentation and public accountability. Young prosecutors across the country began distancing themselves from the tough-on-crime mentality that had defined their profession for decades. A group of reform-minded prosecutors from major cities issued a joint statement saying they would choose justice over politics, mercy over ambition, and community healing over career advancement. For too long, politicians had been able to distance themselves from the consequences of their past actions. Harris's "those were different times" defense had been used by countless politicians to explain away harmful policies. Crockett's presentation showed that voters were no longer willing to accept those excuses. In an age of social media and instant fact-checking, politicians could no longer rely on voters forgetting their past actions. The message was clear: if you're going to dismiss someone as junior, you better make sure your own record can withstand scrutiny. As one political commentator put it, Kamala Harris learned the hard way that in modern politics, calling someone junior while having a questionable record is like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except your opponent brought her entire arsenal of receipts. The confrontation between Harris and Crockett became a defining moment in Democratic politics, showing that the party's future belonged to those willing to confront its past honestly, not those trying to defend it with experience alone. And for Jasmine Crockett, the junior congresswoman who refused to be dismissed, it was proof that sometimes the most powerful weapon in politics isn't experience or connections, it's simply the truth. Thanks for watching this explosive political showdown. If this opened your eyes to how the establishment tries to silence rising voices, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the political battles the mainstream media won't cover. Drop a comment below. Do you think Crockett was right to call out Harris's record, or did she go too far? See you in the next video where we'll reveal which establishment politician is next on the progressive hit list.